if you're a neutral, I think, and you're watching this, you're kind of saying, okay, second half, game on,
Yeah.
right? And we saw that. We saw that from the Spirit. So, with all of what Chicago has gone through with their own injuries in the second half for them, they did make some adjustments. We saw Danny Colaprico come out on the pitch, and Malpiu made her exit. She was not available for the remainder of the game. And some different looks for Chicago. They had a 1-0 goal lead to sort of defend, I think, a little bit in this
Mhm.
in this second half. But something unlike they've had to do with their previous two playoff games. I don't believe in those two previous playoff games. They had to really sustain. They've had to sustain some pressure, but they didn't have to sustain it in waves. And what we started to see from the Spirit was that it was coming in waves. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of bending and bending and bending and bending that was happening for Chicago, which did not allow them to maybe try to be able to hit on a counter themselves, right? Um, and eventually it broke a little bit, but it didn't break in the way that I think people might assume, where you just finally you press and you press and you press, and then you get one in the back of the net, but that didn't happen. What ended up happening was there was some bending and banging, and a foul was committed in the box, and then a penalty was issued, and that's the breakthrough for the Spirit, because it comes at another dangerous point, right? We're touching the hour ish mark of a game, and I think at that point, if you're allowing Chicago to control the game defensively in a very crucial time, those first 15 minutes post second, into the second half, that you gotta imagine if a team like Chicago hangs on for even just 5 more minutes, that deeply frustrates the team like the Spirit with so many attacking pieces. But it ended up working a little bit the other way. That defense did break a little bit. There was a penalty issue. Andi Sullivan steps up to take this PK, and let's be real, wasn't the best taking
No.
PK, and Cassie Miller misses it by inches, and we keep talking about the margins, the very thin ones in this type of championship final, and that's one of those things that we're talking about. It's a game of inches at times, and the Spirit equalized. It is 1-1, and it really is then at that point, game on. It's just it just changed things
I mean,
immediately.
Sandra, you said it best. There are so many times we talk about the timings of games and 5 minutes after a whistle, whether that's the start, after a stoppage time, at the start of half, or after a goal. Those 5 minutes are so crucial, which is when Chicago scored at the end of the first half, 5 minutes left after a bit of stoppage for an injury. And then at the 60-minute mark, this is when Washington has just put so much pressure on Chicago, and ultimately they draw a penalty kick against Tierna Davidson. It was a penalty kick. It was a penalty, and it was a foul. She did get the ball, but way too much body on the tackle. So there's that on that. But this point in the game, around this hour mark, this was when Washington was, as you said, putting so much pressure
Oh,
on. They
yeah.
were
I
finding,
thought they were gonna get another one in the next 5 minutes after
yes,
that.
so much pressure on, and they figured out where the weak points in Chicago were that they could keep attacking. Whereas having Trinity Rodman out on the left wing, where Rodman typically plays on the right, but going up against Tatum Milazzo, the right outside back for Chicago, was working for Trinity Rodman. And if you get Rodman in a one-on-one battle and she continues to do well, maybe not, she's not scoring goals every single time, but it's a fun little game for her. She likes that challenge of trying to get around a defender and to keep going at the same defender. It worked. So Trinity Rodman being out on the left for Washington really worked. She had a lot of good combination plays. She was hungry for a goal. And then the penalty kick happening, it was Tara McKeown, who actually made the run into the center of the box that got the start for Washington, a player that's been in and out of the lineup for Washington and really come and gone a lot this year, but she had a really good game. She draws this penalty kick, and you're exactly right. Andi Sullivan, yes, she found the back of the net. Great job on the equalizer. Oh, but this was struck so poorly, and actually really unlucky for goalkeeper Cassie Miller, because as a goalkeeper, when you're standing in goal against a penalty kick, you have to imagine that the kicker is going to shoot for the corners. So as you make your decision to dive and save, you often dive forward and then sideways. That way you can cut off the angle and get to the ball sooner. because of that, you're going full extension on your save and really laying out your body completely to try to get the ball. Because of that, Miller got almost handcuffed because her arm was completely out, and then her forearm hits the ground, and her knee is on the ground, and the ball goes between her arm and her leg, where you can't bend your arm backwards at that point because you go from a straight arm to a bent arm. Really, if the ball was maybe an inch or two, either left or right, it would have hit off Miller's body, and then it would have been a live ball that maybe she would have been able to jump on. But hey, it happened. It wasn't struck that well, but it found the back of the net. And that goal for Washington, after they had been pushing, it was almost like the balloon popped. And you said it, they were almost going to get another one. That's what I thought, honestly. They looked like it. They were knocking on the door so well.
Yeah, it absolutely felt that way. It just felt like that was the thing that they needed to unlock the game. And I don't mean like unlock Chicago, because it turns out that they ended up not doing that in the with the remainder of regulation.
But it was like a mental block for them.
Yes,
They were like,
it unlocked their brains. That's what it unlocked. It unlocked their brains. It's like, okay, it was like game on. That's what happened.
And ironically, earlier in the regular season, Washington had committed 2 penalties against Chicago for game winners that Morgan Gautrat had finished. And this time it's Chicago committing the penalty kick that unfortunately is the snake bite that gets the Red Stars.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I know we had our preview, and of course, like, I'm not going to come on camera and go against Chicago. It's my hometown, but I did my written preview, and let me tell you, in the written preview, I went with the Spirit, and I also nailed the scoreline. So I'm kind of proud of myself for that. I feel like a winner. I feel like a winner like that. And I literally believe in my pick. I said it's a close, narrow battle, but Chicago's luck runs out. And that's kind of what felt like happened. A little tiny bit. I don't want to take away anything from the Spirit and their performance today, but it remains 1-1 through regulation. Lisa, that goal that we were so sure in our bones that we felt was going to come from this team still didn't come. We were like, let's go. It was like, it's not even that it was like, oh, there's a force field going on around the net. That's not what it was at all. There was just, again, and this word has been used a lot by both of these teams, but there was just this sort of resiliency and this relentless effort in the middle third from Chicago, where it still was difficult for the Spirit to sort of find that breakthrough in regulation. And if you're Chicago, oddly enough, even though you have an equalized game, it almost still felt like their game plan somehow could have benefited them. But you are reminded very, very quickly that despite how good they are at keeping things narrow, keeping things organized, and frustrating and stifling other teams, they have just not enough pieces. There was just so many missing pieces, because the other part of that is like, okay, A, B, and C are here for them, but these other factors are not. So there's just a lot of like, I think there are maybe many what ifs for people who are the game of that. But the players that were on the pitch for Chicago on this day were absolutely enough. I think it is fully disrespectful to try to like come into any space or do any coverage of this and say like, oh, like, you know what? They were going to lose that game because they didn't have player X, Y, Z.
I think that's what makes them even more having the probability to win a game like this, because they have a deep bench and because they've faced constant injuries and adversity on the field. And even 12 minutes in, Vanessa DiBernardo starting center mid goes down and out. Like, that was even more reason to say, you know what, Chicago is going to rise above this, because that's what the Red Stars do. So
we saw as the game goes to extra time, and we saw even as it started to play out, the bench started getting utilized a lot more.
Yeah.
For Chicago, but there were also, but again, there's also question marks around that, because even somebody like Pugh, not the impact that she wanted to have maybe in that first 30 minutes, even though that's all she had in that game. There was very much a wait and see approach
Mhm.
from Pugh in the game. And it probably had a lot to do with the fact that she was not able to train in the way that she was used to train. And if your body's not ready, if you know that your body is not ready to go 90 or more minutes in a big game like this, you maybe do approach it with a little bit of a pick and choose, wait and see type of battle. But she got taken out of the game for other reasons. But for example, somebody like Bianca St. George is coming in as a
Mhm.
substitution for Chicago, comes in as a substitution, goes about 30 minutes and is subbed out as a different because again, these are players that are deep on Chicago's bench, but also have not had a lot of time. And they definitely have not had a lot of time on the pitch in big game moments like this. So it wasn't too surprising to see somebody like a Bianca St. George just get in there, maybe give Chicago a different tactical look. This is an outside back for Chicago who they international that they wanted to have on their back line as an attacking outside back, and she got pushed really high just because probably the game plan was she has 2 feet and legs and can probably run. And
Yeah.
we saw Bianca St. George just sort of playing in a front line, not in the outside back position. So it was tough. I think it was tough to sort of see
Because that's where Chicago
these 2
needed the fresh legs. They needed the fresh legs up top to put pressure on Washington and to try to high press and counter press and win the ball back so then you could attack and go forward. And having a defender that high up to be a high press player, hey, it works in a moment like that because they look tired. Both sides really looked tired, especially towards the end of regulation. And then knowing that they needed to play another 30 minutes of soccer going into that. There were times when Trinity Rodman just hands on knees, heaving for air, trying to grasp at anything she could. And that's where we saw from Chicago, their bench really making a difference. They made such a push, even at the end of regulation. Uh, Aubrey Bledsoe having to make some saves in the end of this full-time game and even the overtime that she didn't have to make earlier in the game. The push and the waves from Chicago, they really came, which made it that much more of an exciting game for the full time that was played, honestly.